Today, I want to tell you guys the story of the time that Scientology orchestrated the largest infiltration of the U.S. government in history. It's called Operation Snow White. Around that time, they were also seriously harassing Paulette Cooper, this woman on screen right here, through various methods that were uncovered when the FBI raided the Scientology offices over the government intrusion and found the documents related to the framing that they did on Paulette Cooper. For real, they framed her. So let me tell you a little bit about Paulette. She's born July 26, 1942 in Belgium. That's only 6 days before my birth, or after my birthday. That's cool. Anyway, she was born in an area that was under Nazi occupation. Her dad was arrested 4 days before she was born, never got to lay eyes on her, and sent to Auschwitz. And her mother was arrested, I think, when she was 2 weeks old or something. She had a sister who was just a couple years older than her, and she was a newborn infant, right? There was I think the attorney general over Belgium at the time was working for the Nazis, but was secretly moving children from place to place to get them out of Nazi control, and bribing the guy that decided who was on the list and who was getting on the trains and stuff. He's bribing the guy to let some people go. Well, the Nazis uncovered the bribing scheme and removed that guy from his position of authority. But on his very last attempt, his very last bribing scheme, Paulette Cooper and her sister Susie got out. They were taken off the list. Now, what are you going to do with a 2-year-old and a 0-year-old, like a practically a newborn? And they were Jewish. There were connections in America to adoption agencies and stuff, but these agencies wouldn't take a lot of kids. So there's like a black market where people were, when they were rejected for adoption because they weren't perfect candidates, they were a gay couple secretly, or it was not acceptable to adopt when you were gay then. In fact, it wasn't even acceptable to be gay then. Or they were too old, or whatever other thing. There was an underground network connecting these Jewish children who escaped concentration camps to these people in America who wanted to adopt but were rejected for one reason or another. Paulette Cooper was adopted by the Coopers. Her parents' last name were Nieminkowski. I'm not really sure. They were Polish Jews. I'm not sure how to pronounce it or what the format is on that or whatever. But in the 70s or the late 60s, I think 1969 maybe, she had a friend in the advertising agency. She was a writer. Eventually, she became a writer. She had a friend in the advertising agency. BBDO was the name of the ad agency. This friend's name was Bob, okay? Or that's how he's referred to in this book that I read about it. Bob appears in her room, they're chit-chatting, and he says, "Come sit on my lap, Paulette." And she's like, okay. She comes and sits on his lap, or whatever. I mean, it's the 60s and the 70s, so I guess that's just what you do when you're a woman and a dude tells you to sit on his lap. So she comes and sits on his lap, and he says, "I just discovered that I'm Jesus Christ." And she starts getting, far more concerned than she already was. And he says, "And God wants me to rape you." That's what he said. So things started getting real, and she kind of surprisingly talked her way out of that situation, if you can believe it. She got out of that situation safely. I think she said, "Well, I think God wanted you to take a picture of me first," and she's wearing a sheer nightgown or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it played out. And so he allowed her to stand up, and he had the camera, and she bolted, basically, is what it was. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me on that fact. Anyways, she starts looking into this weird thing that just happened, right? Like, what the hell? Her old friend Bob? He had joined Scientology. So she starts investigating it and goes to, like, some of their courses. She writes this Queen Magazine article. Queen Magazine was about to be bought out by another organization, another company. It was absorbed into Harper's Bazaar. I've never heard of it, but apparently it's a pretty popular monthly women's fashion magazine. I don't know. Anyway, Queen Magazine was absorbed by Harper's Bazaar, but on its last issue, Queen Magazine released her article that was critical of Scientology. FYI, the sources that I'm getting all this from, it appears to be Wikipedia, It's not from Wikipedia. It's a book called The Unbreakable Miss Lovely by Tony Ortega. I'm just kind of using, the Wikipedia article to remember the timeline of events here. So anyways, when this article in Queen Magazine comes out, she starts getting phone calls. Remember, no cell phones at the time, and your phone was listed in the phone book, your home phone, and with your name and everything. She starts getting phone calls that were obscene, like really obscene, like talking about, very dirty things they're going to do to her. And it was like multiple, like lots of these calls. Then she was basically threatened and told to stop talking about Scientology, and they tried to sue her. I think they filed like 19 lawsuits at one point. I don't know exactly how many, for defamation and all kinds of stuff. Of course, they were all going to be dismissed if they were adjudicated at all, eventually, because a defense to defamation is the truth. And basically, every single thing she said in there was the truth. That's why it's extremely important that I get every fact correct in this video, because they're a litigious company. Now, I haven't drawn their ire or attention, and I don't want to. I just want to talk about how much they suck. That's all. Anyways, she's being sued and everything, and a bunch of Scientologists, or ex-Scientologists, start coming out of the woodwork and contacting her and saying, "You've helped me so much. I really appreciate the work you've done. It's really, really valuable." And L. Ron Hubbard's son himself, the founder of Scientology, dude's name was Nibs, is what he went by at the time, at least in the book. I think they used fake names for like 2 or 3 people. Anyway, Nibs shows up and says, "Hey, I want to take down my dad." And she says, "That's fantastic. Let's work together to take him down." So they sit in their little, in her apartment there together, and they're writing articles that are critical of L. Ron Hubbard and draw a very different picture than the one that he drew for himself. She's working on a new book called The Scandal of Scientology at this point. And this book was 22 chapters, and it was set to release June 1971. That's when it was going to come out. So this, the Queen Magazine article, I think, was released in 1969. Yeah. December 1969 issue of Queen. That's when this Queen article came out. So basically a 2-year or 1.5-year period of time between when the Queen Magazine article came out and when the Scandal of Scientology came out, right? And L. Ron Hubbard's son was helping her with some of this stuff. One day, an FBI agent shows up at her apartment and starts talking to her. She lives in New York City, or at the time she lived there, right? In Manhattan, on 80th Street and 1st Avenue, I think, or somewhere in that vicinity. And it was just like a little walk up. She was on like the 3rd floor, no elevator, so she had to walk up 3 flights of stairs every time she comes home. Those are reasonably inexpensive, especially for a single person. They're not that bad, the prices on those. So anyway, she lived in one of those, and an FBI agent comes and knocks on her door, starts asking her questions, and says, Scientology received these bomb threats, and you appear to be like somebody who's been researching them for a while, right? And she says, "Well, it wasn't me. So I'll sit down with this guy. I'll talk to this FBI agent and whatever. I mean, I have no problem. I'm totally innocent. So I'll say whatever, he wants to hear to explain what I was doing or where I was or whatever, because it wasn't me. I'll give him any information that he needs, right?" So she invites him into her home, sits down and talks to him and everything. So the FBI agent leaves and everything kind of goes back to normal. She continues writing her book, The Scandal of Scientology, and shortly thereafter, she's called to testify in front of a grand jury. So she shows up to the grand jury, and her good friend gave her a list of questions to ask and answers to give if those questions turned out a certain way, right? So the first question on the list, as soon as she walked in, "Am I the target of the indictment?" She was thinking, of course not, right? And they said, "Yes, you are. You are the target here." And she's like taken aback and just like looks at the next question on the list, and she says, "Can I leave and come back with an attorney?" And they said, yes, you can. So she left. She goes and calls an attorney. She had her parents split the bill with her, $5,000, which is a lot of money at the time. My God, $5,000 in the late 60s, early 70s? Crazy money at the time. We're talking, let's see, what's a conversion? $1 in 1970s equivalent to $7.88 today. So let's see, it'd be 5,000 times 788, basically. So we're talking about $31,000 roughly is, the rough equivalent. That's insane. That is crazy money. Okay, I couldn't come up with 15 grand on the spot, but she and her parents both did basically. Anyway, so they come up with the money. She shows up with her attorney and she answers all of the questions. I don't remember if they decided to indict her at that moment or not, but she was in a lot of trouble. They were really, really serious about this. And let me tell you the evidence they had and the charges. They were charging her with sending in 2 bomb threats to Scientology's office in New York City, like their main center there. It's in Times Square. And she lives on 80th Street, so theirs is on 45th Street, 7th Avenue. She's on 80th Street and 1st Avenue or somewhere in that vicinity. So, kind of a diagonal jump there. But anyway, the second bomb threat had her fingerprint on the back of it and was typed up on her typewriter. And she's like, how could this have possibly happened? I don't understand. As it turns out, she believes, this is a conclusion she came to, because L. Ron Hubbard's son, Nibs, eventually went back to Scientology and then came out, went back, came out, flip-flop, flip-flop. She believes that it was probably Nibs who was working for Scientology at the time and used an article critical of his dad as a cover story to get himself into her apartment. And when he got in, he typed it up on her typewriter, brought it back to his dad, gave it to him. And again, a lot of this is speculation because we don't really fully know exactly what happened, except later on, Scientology offices were raided, and we got a whole bunch of documents on it. She's filling in the gaps where she wasn't super sure. I'm trying to give you information about where she was filling in the gaps. So anyway, they had a document that was printed on her typewriter with her fingerprint on the back of the piece of paper, and that was the evidence. That's actually pretty damning. If you have that kind of evidence from somebody, man, I don't know. The evidence points at him. What else do you say, right? I don't know how else to, book closed, right? A fingerprint, and it was forensically determined it was typed on her typewriter. That's crazy. That's crazy. Well, it turns out, as far as she can tell, that her stationery did not have her fingerprint on it. So they had to get her fingerprint another way. And here's what they did. They sent a guy who appeared to be drunk to her around with a clipboard that had a joke written on it, and he showed up at the bar that she went to and slid the clipboard over to her and asked her to read the joke. And of course, your natural inclination is to pick it up, right? Well, she didn't. She just read the joke and kind of laughed, whatever. It was a stupid dad joke. And he was drunk anyway. He was doing it to everybody in the bar. She leaves. A few days later, she sees the exact same guy right outside of her apartment building and bar, they were right next to each other, walking around showing people the joke. And he walks up to her and he shows her a new joke, and she grabs the clipboard. She believes that there was, that piece of stationery taped to the back of the clipboard, and when she grabbed the clipboard, she touched it with her finger, and that's how they got it. She wonders if the bomb threat was already typed up on the paper, or if they transferred her, her fingerprint from the clipboard to the paper or what. She doesn't know. But they got her fingerprint on this paper, and they got it from her typewriter. This is called Operation Lovely in Scientology documents, what I'm explaining right now. L. Ron Hubbard seemed to have some weird obsession with her. Kind of inexplicable. Nobody really understood what was going on. He thought she was the Antichrist or something. That's a direct quote, by the way, from one of the high-ranking Scientology officials who eventually got indicted for some of this stuff. So he was focused, he zeroed in on her. And all the while, he was plotting this whole idea that he wanted to do. Now, he was under investigation already, under the close watch of the government, because he owed a ton of money in back taxes. He didn't pay a dime on all the money he brought in from all of the people. Eventually, by the end of it, he owed $1 billion in taxes. So he was basically on the run using pseudonyms and stuff. And he was also a famous face because, not just because of Scientology, he was about as famous as Isaac Asimov. Extremely famous sci-fi writer from the 20s and the 30s. They wrote what was called pulp fiction because it was fiction written on paper that was made out of pulp. It was really, really inexpensive. It was like a penny a page kind of thing, right, at the time, in the 20s and 30s. And he is the most published author in the world, I believe. Not because of Scientology. Before Scientology. It was because he wrote so much stuff. He just pumped it out like mad. Kind of like I do with YouTube videos. So anyways, he wrote Pulp Fiction, and he was famous for that. So he had to go by a pseudonym and basically stay out of public, or people would recognize him. Certainly any government official would recognize him, like anybody that was looking for him, any member of the FBI or IRS or anybody like that. Because the FBI kind of knew that he did some really sleazy stuff, like what I'm describing with Paulette. So he starts staying on a kind of group of boats. There were 5 boats out in the ocean, in international waters. One of the boats, the one that I believe he stayed on, was called the Apollo. And there was another boat there called the Diana, named after his daughter. So anyway, he stayed out there in international waters to prevent his capture, prosecution, or prevent anybody from asking any tough questions, right? Well, he instructed his little minions. He's going from port to different countries periodically and seeding Scientology churches, if you will. He was seeding Scientology groups. It's really not a church as much as it is a psychology cult. Dianetics, the book that he wrote that started it, it was really supposed to kind of replace a lot of the psychological models that we have today, or that we had at the time. He believed that there was an analytical mind and a reactive mind. Analytical thinks like a computer, purely logical, step by step, and reactive is when you're dealing with trauma or emotions or whatever other thing. And the idea was to calm the reactive mind. Just get rid of it entirely. And you do that by using this thing called an e-meter. I think I may have a picture of an e-meter here. E-meters are extremely straightforward and simple to make. They're really not difficult at all. Matter of fact, I made an e-meter effectively myself, like a long time ago. This is the e-meter that I made right here. An e-meter is basically just a little thing that detects the minute amounts of sweat in your skin and then sends that electric pulse. Like it modulates an electric pulse, basically. Scientology's e-meter sends it to a needle that kind of moves back and forth. So when you get nervous, these very minute amounts of sweat, it comes out of your fingertips. Amounts you can't even tell are there, except through this extremely delicate equipment. So they have a needle that goes back and forth when you start to get nervous. I used a computer speaker that I pulled out of one of my computers. As you can see on the e-meter that I made, again, it's a galvanic skin resistance tester, actually. It's just like one part of a lie detector tester. As you can see, I have, I use little tinfoil wraps that go around your fingers. Well, Scientology e-meters use what they call cans. My e-meter cost me about $5 in parts to solder together. Scientology's e-meter costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. If you buy one used on eBay, you can get it for $500. Seriously. So anyway, he was going around seeding these little Scientology groups, encouraging people to use these e-meters to calm their reactive mind, which, I can see how that could be valuable, I suppose. Help people work through the problems that they have. You sit there with somebody else called auditing. You sit across from someone. They're looking at the e-meter. You're holding the cans, the little metal things that go to, the wires and everything. And anytime you approach a subject that makes you anxious or nervous or whatever in some way, the auditor is supposed to expand upon that. They're supposed to get you to tell the story. Build on it. I want you to be nervous, and I want you to talk about this until you're not nervous about it anymore. It's an interesting strategy, and there are parallels to it in real psychology instead of fake psychology, the way that L. Ron Hubbard was building it. I guess a parallel would be, for people who have anxiety or PTSD, voluntary exposure therapy. That would be its parallel, I suppose, something like it. So anyways, in Scientology, you start at the beginning of your life, every memory that you have, and you go all the way to the end. Embarrassing stuff, painful stuff, everything, until you can talk about any subject in your life and that e-meter will stay at 0. basically. That was the plan. Except you have to give Scientology money for all of this stuff. You're paying them for these auditing sessions. And while you're being audited, the other guy that's doing it is writing everything down that you say and sending a copy to Scientology's headquarters. L. Ron Hubbard had access to this stuff at the time. That's how you get websites like this. Check this out. I'm just going to type in who is Leah Remini, because she is a famous ex-Scientologist. She just left Scientology 2013, I think. So I just type in who is she. Second search result, Leah Remini, the facts. Okay, let's click on this. Just take a look. Statement from the Church of Scientology International. Leah Remini has carried on a bigoted and hate-filled crusade for years, shamelessly capitalizing on her vengeance against the Church of Scientology. Blah, blah, blah. And they even get people who knew her, family members and loved ones, her own parents, or whoever they can get, anybody, to make videos critical of her. They do this to people who are being, quote-unquote, fair-gamed. This guy, Marty Rathbun, he's an ex-Scientologist who went back to Scientology 10 years later and is now using it as, his time on the outside as a premise to slander and destroy and attack. It's really sad to see Marty Rathbun go back like this. Anyway, this is by no stretch of the imagination the only website like this. You want to see some other stuff? It gets crazy. Tony Ortega is the guy that wrote this book about The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, the book about Paulette Cooper that I'm referring to here. Tony Ortega is a phenomenally good writer, and he has this Substack called the Underground Bunker, I think. Is this his website? See, this is the problem. Like, I want to show you the dude's website, but I can't tell if it's actually his or if it's one set up by Scientology to slander him. It's really hard to tell, or to be libelous, I suppose. I think this one is the real one, just TonyOrtega.org, I believe. It's so hard to know for sure. Let's see if TonyOrtega.com is the critical one. No, it's just non-existent, apparently. Fascinating. Okay. Well, anyways, there was a source cited in this Wikipedia page about Scientology that I was reading recently. Is a Tony Ortega article written on the Phoenix New Times, right? So I go there. It's called Double Crossed. I go there, and I can't find the article. It's a 404 error. I'm like, what's going on? So I go to Tony Ortega's page on Phoenix New Times, and I click right there, Double Crossed. I found it. This whole thing was not written by Tony Ortega. This account does not belong to Tony Ortega. Here's why you should be skeptical about what Graham Barry and Robert Cipriano say about the Church of Scientology. Who the hell are these people, and why do I care? It's bizarre that they're trying to defend a couple of people like this, right? Barry's been after the church for years, and he makes no secret of his desire to litigate the 45-year-old organization to its knees. An eloquent New Zealand-born attorney who lives in Santa Monica, Barry enjoyed his role as one of the few attorneys who battles a controversial organization full-time, blah, blah, blah. It's fake. Somebody other than Tony Ortega wrote this, obviously, right? Tony Ortega, Paulette Cooper, and Leah Remini are the three most notable critics against Scientology. And Scientology does not like them. Oh, and Mike Rinder, those four people. Mike Rinder was about as high up as it gets in Scientology. He was dealing with Tom Cruise and stuff at one point. And just look at some of the other articles on this supposed account by Tony Ortega. Pirate Booty is what this one is titled, written 2003 supposedly. Considering the unexpected amorous complexities of Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, perhaps it was auspicious to take a couple of lesbians to see the Disney romp. After all, the last thing you expect from a movie based on a theme park ride is a gender-busting love triangle. But that's just what seemed to be happening in this overlong, special effects bloated tease of a film. It was the worst kind of foreplay, said Angela Pulliam, the entrepreneurial manager of Lesbos a Go-Go, a local lesbian burlesque troupe. So you can see what's happening here, right? Why would Tony Ortega ever write anything like this? This is absurd. It's poorly written. It's anti-LGBT. It's just absurd from top to bottom. That's what happens when you start criticizing Scientology. For real. These weird little things just pop up out of nowhere. Not saying they're orchestrated by the church. I'm just saying I've noticed a weird correlation, is all. And, double-crossed this article cited on a Wikipedia article. Again, fake. Yeah, it's just negative stuff. So that's Tony Ortega. You can never really fully be sure that the website you're looking at is actually written by or owned by Tony Ortega. If you want to know how to reach Tony Ortega's stuff, go to the Underground Bunker Substack. Not the top search result, because I've seen somebody, I don't know, Scientology, who knows? I don't know. Somebody paying thousands of dollars a month to get a search result to the very top, above the rankings that the person themselves has. Putting these search results above them that are extremely negative. So make sure you click on the real thing. Tony Ortega's Substack, The Underground Bunker, is his real thing. I can verify this is real for a fact if you want to read more about it. So anyway, that's the kind of thing that I've seen happen to ex-Scientologists and people who are critical of it. I mean, this is just one of the many websites by Leah Remini right here that is set up like that. I mean, look, it's propaganda beginning to end. You can tell it's propaganda because of how everything is framed. This picture makes her look angry, right? And the pictures that come up next to her are people who are calm and happy and fine and set up as expert witnesses. They appear as though they are expert witnesses. So they frame up an angry person next to a calm person and let your mind do the expanding, right? Leah's stepmother did a video about Leah Remini and how evil she is or whatever. I don't know what she said, and I'm hesitant to watch it publicly. Oh, okay, it doesn't even show her, but let's just kind of glance through. This is what Leah Remini's stepmother said about her, presumably Scientologist. Yeah, I think she's just off the wall right now. Because listen to me, she, I guess, chose this route. But the anger, I think a lot of her attitude, anger, like, shut the fuck up, that kind of thing. I think a lot of that anger was possibly kept in better check when she was a member, all right? I mean, I really thought about this, and as you can hear, but I think the phone stopped ringing. What does that mean? Does that mean that Leah Remini lost her marbles? Is that what's being implied? And that's it in a nutshell. I mean, they have people close to you who you really care about. Oh, there's a transcript below. I should have just looked at the transcript. They have people in your life who you really care about write negative stuff about you. And again, this is just one website. Check this one out. Who is Leah Remini? Aftermath. The Aftermath was a TV series on A&E that was critical of Scientology, hosted by Leah Remini. Now, you just have to scroll down a little bit. The top result here, when you start looking at like the actual results, the search results, top result is a website built to be critical of Leah Remini and in a propagandistic way. We see the exact same formula here. Images of Leah Remini looking angry and just mad and bitter and ugly next to people who look rational and calm. See how that works? That's how this propaganda operates. And interestingly enough, all of these websites have a similar code base. You can tell they're all set up very similarly to each other. I mean, you've got the menu along the side here in the same exact font as some of the others. Let's just do Who is Mike Rinder? Who is Mike Rinder? Right here. See? Exact same font. Isn't that weird? Same font, same setup with the pictures. He's angry and ugly and dark, set up next to a nice, happy, joyful face, an expert witness, quote unquote. And when pictures of him come in, they're all ugly pictures. And guess what? Somehow they gained access to information that nobody else had. Whoever made these websites, information that only Mike Rinder had, only Leah Remini had, only Chris Shelton had about his personal feelings on a subject or his life or whatever. Wonder how they would have gotten subjects like that, huh? Super weird. So anyways, let me continue with the story of Paulette Cooper. This is before the age of the internet. Scientology, this is now out in the open. Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, framed her for bomb threats and almost got her put in prison. I mean, she was prescribed to Valium or Xanax, like a Xanax equivalent, and she was saving exactly enough to take the whole bottle before the trial, if that's what happened. She was drunk all the time. She had a couple of friends around, Barbara, a woman named Paula that she got into the building, and a close friend named Jerry. Jerry and Paula and Barbara saw her through this whole thing. She lived in this building that had a doorman. She needed to, because if she didn't, then, some crazy stuff would happen, or she was afraid some crazy stuff would happen. She weighed 83 pounds at her smallest because she wasn't eating or anything. She wasn't taking care of herself at all. And her friend Jerry was like right across the hall from her or something, and was taking care of her little dog, was making sure the dog was fed and walked and everything else, bathed and all that while she was down. And Jerry eventually, like when she got to her worst point, was like, he moved in with her and was helping her with everything, and her parents are paying her rent for her. And she's just a complete mess because of what Scientology was doing to her in Operation Lovely and Operation Freakout. So around this time, Nixon is being impeached or resigning or whatever. Watergate's going on. The Watergate trials are going on. And L. Ron Hubbard spent his time going around seeding, Scientology centers around the world. And these countries are basically investigating Scientology, don't like the tactics that they use, and start like kicking them out and stuff, right? And he was not welcome at many ports anymore at this point. L. Ron Hubbard wasn't, or any of his boats. He had a little navy that he called. It was like 5 boats, I think, or something. So the people that he seeded, the groups that he seeded in these countries, 136 countries, were instructed to get their way into government buildings and find any documentation on Scientology at all and get rid of it. Or bring it to L. Ron Hubbard, ideally. Burn it. Something. This is called Operation Snow White. The operation that took place in the United States was orchestrated by 2 people primarily. One person, I think, had a real ID badge to get into this office, but he wasn't very high up. And he produced a fake ID badge that he could show to people for another person to get into these offices. So they'd hang out with the people at the higher floors, the floors that they needed access to, and they'd smoke cigarettes with them and get close to them, be friendly, get to know their family and everything, until the person at higher floors that they're wooing, if you will. This really happened. The person said, "Hey, you mind going upstairs and getting a cigarette?" Gives the guy the key to get up to the higher floor so he can get a cigarette for him out of his coat. He gets up there, gets a cigarette, roughly shapes a key to match the one that he had, and then moves things around so that he has access to this area again, and then goes back down, gives the key to Scientology, and now they have access to the highest offices at the IRS. So they go into this boardroom that they know is going to host a discussion about Scientology and auditing them. And they take this little listening device, plug it into the wall. It was like a power strip, basically. It was a listening device and a power strip. They plug it into the wall, and it transmits an FM signal within like 100 yards or something. So somebody goes out to the parking lot right in front of the building, tunes their FM radio to the right station, and turns on a tape recorder and just starts recording and listening to everything that took place in these IRS offices. I mean, this is a full-blown infiltration of the U.S. government. Like I said, largest infiltration in U.S. history. They were copying document after document after document with their fake IDs and their keys that they had copied and their listening devices and everything. The government became wise to this and eventually raided the Scientology offices and discovered so many documents that had been copied or stolen or whatever that they had to bring a truck in to fill this gigantic box truck with documents that they had stolen, Scientology had taken. The people that ran this operation were called the Guardian's Office at Scientology. It's been disbanded. That was Operation Snow White. I believe there were 6 indictments, and there were 9 unindicted co-conspirators somewhere in there. Don't quote me on that number. So anyways, L. Ron Hubbard denied any affiliation. He was working under pseudonyms, and he was, avoiding major areas of traffic or anything because he didn't want to be recognized by anybody lest he be arrested. And at one point, he lived in Queens, New York City, while he was orchestrating this Operation Snow White and this attack on Paulette. When the U.S. government raided the facilities for this, the documents that were taken, they also found documents on Operation Lovely and Operation Freakout. The plan to frame Paulette Cooper for all of this stuff and get her put in a mental institution or get her put in jail or kill her. One of the three things. The assassination thing that I mentioned, that was only attested to by one of the higher-ups in the Guardian's office at Scientology, and it was said under sworn affidavit, so take that for what you will. There were no documents saved or retained to validate the claim that they intended to kill her if they couldn't get her put in prison or something. But, there were other weird little things, like people showing up to her family member's house with a gun and stuff. Just weird stuff, right? So anyways, that exonerated Paulette. She was exonerated officially because they found documents on Operation Lovely and Operation Freakout, which, by the by, I haven't even mentioned Operation Freakout yet. So that was Operation Snow White. That was the infiltration of the U.S. government. But in their raid, the government also found documents for Operation Freakout. Operation Freakout consisted of basically an elaborate plan. Let me tell you the series of events. There's somebody that was going to listen to recordings of Paulette. They were tapping her phones and everything, Scientology was. She believes, and there's strong evidence to suggest. In fact, I think the documents even say it, that were taken from Scientology. Anyways, this woman was doing her best to imitate Paulette, get her voice down. They got a wig for her that looked exactly like Paulette's hair and, wore some of her clothes and everything. They send her into a laundromat, and they tell her to yell some stuff about Jews and Arabs and stuff and say, I'm going to bomb the Arab consulate, and I'm going to bomb Henry Kissinger, who was the Attorney General, I think, or Secretary of Defense or something, under Gerald Ford. And she said, and I'm going to kill the president. That's what this fake Paulette said. If this really happened, this part of Operation Freakout took place, but it wasn't fully fulfilled. This operation wasn't. So then they have another Scientologist walk in behind Paulette and say to this laundromat guy, geez, she was crazy. You should call the police or something. And then a third Scientologist go to a payphone nearby and do an anonymous call with paper over the phone receiver thing and say, I just heard some crazy woman talking about attacking the president, and then hang up. I don't want to get involved. I'm not going to leave my name. Click. Now the FBI shows up. They look at, security cameras at the laundromat if there are any. If there aren't, they have the laundromat guy as a witness that stood there and watched it, and he's completely unaffiliated with Scientology, legitimately. And she said at the counter, my name is Paulette Cooper. Look it up again. She didn't have any clothes there, obviously, because that wasn't her laundromat, or she would have been recognized. I mean, again, this whole thing was in operation and then expanded upon when they found the documents, the FBI, in Scientology headquarters. Anyways, when the FBI found all those documents at their headquarters, she was exonerated. She had been under indictment, or she'd been under an agreement that she wasn't going to leave the state at all, like leave New York State, until this is all cleared up. And it was all cleared up. She went to 1 year of counseling as directed by the state, because they still believed that she had done it at that point. And she stayed within the bounds of the state, and she followed all the instructions and everything as explained to her for the supposed bomb threats that she sent in to the Scientology offices that we now know Scientology orchestrated themselves. Well, that stuff was finally lifted because she fulfilled her end of the deal, and they found the documents at the headquarters, and she moved to California to handle litigation that Scientology had brought against her. And that threw a wrench into the entire Operation Freakout thing. So Operation Freakout stopped at the point at which the FBI was called because, Paulette Cooper, blah, 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 the woman in the wig. That's where Operation Freakout ceased because they couldn't figure out what to do next. But before that, pages from her teenage diary were hand-delivered to her dad's office. And the person asked the secretary or whatever to deliver this to Mr. Kruper, intentionally mispronounced. I don't know why they told him to mispronounce his name that way, but that was important. evidently. So the dad gets pages of her teenage diary where she's thinking about, all the things teenagers think about. And one specific line that really bothered her, they copied out of her diary that said that she hated her parents when she was 17. Of course, she didn't. She loved them a lot, but teenagers hate their parents, right? She's like, my diary was buried in my closet this entire time. And she connected the dots. It was Jerry, the guy that came and stayed with her in her apartment, took care of her little dog while she was like about to check out because of everything that was happening. Dude that was closer to her than anybody, it was him. He was a Scientology spy, about as high up as it gets. He stole her diary. She sat there and told stories to him that are very, very personal. She wouldn't have told to anybody else. She trusted him like a brother. He was a Scientology spy living with her the entire time. This is all part of their fair game doctrine, the fair game doctrine that L. Ron Hubbard created. The fair game doctrine is anybody who is critical of Scientology is fair game. You do whatever it takes. Break their car windows, pour bleach in their lawn to kill their grass, to send a message, whatever. I mean, we can see exactly what happened to Paulette Cooper here, right? And to the IRS when they were auditing or investigating L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology and stuff. It's absolutely psychotic. Anyways, after L. Ron Hubbard died, a lot of this stuff goes away for Paulette Cooper. A new person takes charge, David Miscavige. There's a little bit of a power struggle in the church. And the Guardian's office was disbanded before L. Ron Hubbard died. And they stopped framing people for murders, and they stopped attempting assassinations. But they still do things like bust in car windows, pour chemicals in people's lawns, follow them around, track them, send in spies to live with them. You can never know if the boyfriend that you have is a secret Scientologist or not. For real. That's what Scientology is known for doing. Absolutely psychotic. Anyway, that brings us to Danny Masterson. I talked about that not too long ago. Danny Masterson is a Scientologist in good standing and was accused of some pretty heinous stuff by women who were Scientologists. Jane Doe number 1, I can't say her last name, but it's okay to know their other names because Scientology already knows their names. So what's the point in hiding? There's no point. One of them is Nisha Trout. That's Jane Doe number 2, I think. And then there's Chrissy Bixler. That's Jane Doe number 3. I may be getting those two mixed up. Just Jen is Jane Doe number 1. We're just calling her Jen. And there's a fourth one. I don't know her name. But anyways, imagine what those women went through recently. Imagine what they went through in this whole process. Insane. You have got to feel for people who become the target of this kind of hate. It's nuts. Like I said earlier, the websites and everything else, they didn't do websites against these women because the court was specifically and intentionally keeping their names private, even though Scientology knew the names. So if things started coming out about them publicly, like who is ChrissyBixler.com or whatever, the court would know that it was a witness intimidation technique, basically. And they would have gotten in a lot more trouble for that. So anyways, support those women if you can. Chrissy Bixler, she's on the gram, I believe. Nisha Trout is on the Twit or X.com and also the gram, I believe, Instagram. So check them out if you're interested. And just support anybody that comes against Scientology because they are about as an organization, about as depraved and disturbing as it gets. Again, a lot of this stuff that I've discussed today was done under L. Ron Hubbard, and he died in 1986, I believe, on a ranch in, I'm not sure where. I'm not sure which state. I want to say Montana, but that could be wrong. He came ashore, lived on this ranch for a while, and then eventually died in 86. Yeah, 1986. I couldn't remember if it was 81 or 86. Anyway, 1986 is when he died. He actually asked, he's starting to lose it near the end. He asked the ranch guy that lived there to modify an e-meter to send a high enough current through him that it would, take his life. And the guy said, no, I can't do that. I'm not doing that. No. And L. Ron Hubbard basically pressured him into it and said, do it. So the guy rigged it up to some Tesla coils and routed it back into the e-meter and made sure that enough voltage would come through to shock the shit out of him, but not actually kill him. And it would give him a real good showing with the Tesla coils. Like, you'd see all this electricity zapping all over the place in the air, and it would hurt really bad. Might even give him a burn on his skin, but it wasn't going to kill him. And they gave him the E-meter, the modified one, and he used it. But, of course, it didn't take him out. So he kept on going until the day he finally died of natural causes, basically. That's how L. Ron Hubbard died. Then there's a big power struggle over who was going to run it next and blah, blah, blah. The rest is history. So, yeah, that's the story of the time Scientology orchestrated the largest infiltration on the U.S. government in history, and the time that they, God, what do you even call this? Tried to frame a reporter for all kinds of stuff and get her put in jail. She was facing down 15 years at least for the first bomb threats. Not to mention what would have happened for Operation Freakout. I don't know. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. This is absolutely psychotic. Everything about it is insane. And you have to be extremely careful where you get your sources about Scientology. You can't just get it anywhere because we've got, people going around posting fake stuff all over the place. So just be very, very careful where you get your sources. For what it's worth, I went through something very similar, not because of Scientology, but because of Trump supporters, Trumpists, extremists in my old hometown. They turned against me. They were following me. They were honking their horns as they drove by my house. Every 15 seconds, somebody new is honking their horn. It was psychotic. People walking around my car, threatening to burn down my house. And when I came to New York City, I moved to escape this stuff. A picture of my front door was sent to me. A picture of my front door in New York City. Seriously. All this to say, Trump extremists are just as ruthless and extreme as Scientology was back in the 70s and kind of, is now. They do a lot of ruthless stuff still. And I think they're just as organized in the form of the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, things like that. Like a private army. They're just as organized as Scientology. And they even orchestrated a government insurrection or sedition against the U.S. government, similarly to Scientology, right? I guess it wasn't an insurrection or sedition. It was just stealing documents, infiltration. Anyway, yeah, let me know what you think. It's insane, dude. It's insane the types of people that are out there. This is where extremism brings you, by the way, right here. What we're talking about. Trump supporters' extremism, Scientology's extremism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. I mean, they all have their own little extreme branches and do everything they can to pull the rug out from under you and make sure you fall flat on your face. Insane stuff, man. Oh, yeah, they also have a prison camp. I may have forgotten to mention that. The prison camp is they don't call it a prison camp. They call it a re-education camp, I think. People are free to leave at any time, from my understanding, Insane. Absolutely insane shit. This is the kind of shit you got to worry about when you publicly speak out against extremist groups. That's why I live in a place that has a doorman. Frankenstein, if someone tried to make a movie about this, would Scientology go nutter butter to stop it? This is fascinating stuff, Owen. I appreciate that. Yes, they would. Absolutely. They're famous for filing lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. Not because they think they'll win. They know they'll lose most of this stuff. They just want to drain you of money. Time Magazine, I believe it was Time Magazine, don't quote me on that, put out a video about Scientology and spent $8 million defending themselves from all these different lawsuits. $8 million. They won, of course. It was just defamation lawsuits of all sorts. But the goal is to drain you of time and money. And they succeed at that. Imagine what those women went through that came out against Danny Masterson. They need our support, man. That's why nobody talks about Scientology. Because of all of that. That's why it's a risk for even me to talk about it. But I can't not talk about a cult, right? I can't avoid a subject for fear of retribution. Guess what? I picked this industry. This is the one I care about. This is the one that I have to deal with. I made my bed and now I'm going to lie in it. If that means being attacked by Trump supporters, crazed Trump supporters, or Scientology or Jehovah's Witnesses or whoever, whatever it is, That's what it is. And I'm sure that if that happens, or when that happens, my community will come to my defense to help me, because you guys have in the past, you know. Anyway, just psychotic stuff, dude. Psychotic stuff. I heard Scientologists hate psychiatric meds. What if Haldol was dumped into the water cooler in Clearwater? Right. Their headquarters are actually in, I think, L.A. and New York City, and then L.A., I believe, originally. And then they tried to take over Clearwater, Florida. And they failed. It was like a hostile takeover where they take over the government and everything. I believe Haldol is like an antipsychotic. Yeah, haloperidol is an antipsychotic. Well, here's the thing. Here's the scary thing about Scientology, cults, extreme beliefs like that. They're nearly indistinguishable from mental illness, but medicine can't fix it. That's the disturbing thing about this whole ordeal. You can't give a Scientologist Haldol to fix it. You know, my brother hears voices. He has schizophrenia. My brother sees things and stuff regularly. He can take medicine to stop that. Scientologists cannot.